Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Mary Haspel, and today we're going to be talking about understanding and intervening with challenging behavior. While many people associate challenging behavior with children with autism, that's actually not true. Children with autism can present with restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, but those patterns of behavior don't necessarily equate to challenging behavior. Challenging behavior is actually symptomatic of a skill that might be weak or deficient in an individual. It actually means there's something that needs to be taught. Many people associate with behavior as being something bad, but what I want to do is I want to show you how behavior actually gives us a window to understanding the purpose that it serves an individual and the skill that we need to teach in order to help that child. This quote by Tom Herner really illustrates what I mean about understanding behavior in a different way. Tom Herner was the former president of the National Association of State Directors of Special Education. And he said, if a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. And he kept going. He said if they don't know how to swim or drive or multiply, we automatically think, hey, we should teach those skills. But when it comes to behavior, we flounder a little bit. We think to ourselves, should we teach or should we be punishing this? I think we feel there's a lot of pressure to punish, especially when you're out in public. Parents really feel like, I should show that I have this under control. But it's hard to do that, especially when you're not sure what to teach. So let's talk about how do you figure out the skills your child needs to learn. The good news is behavior actually only serves one of two purposes: to get or get out of something. That probably seems too simple, right? But social scientists have actually studied human behavior for a very long time and found out it's highly predictable. In fact, there's a whole science built upon studying human behavior. It's called applied behavioral analysis. One of the first things people figured out was that behavior is governed by something called reinforcement. Reinforcement is the thing that happens after a behavior that strengthens it. It's why we keep doing it. So when we're hungry, we go eat, right? We're getting something. We're satiating ourselves. It's reinforcing when we eat because it makes the feeling of hunger go away. When the alarm goes off in the morning, we shut it off every day. Well, most days. Because we want the sound to go away. We keep engaging in that pattern of behavior because it serves us a purpose. We get or we get out of something. Let's look at reinforcement within an example. Here we have two examples of reinforcement. The type of reinforcement that's associated with getting something is actually called positive reinforcement. You can see a little plus sign underneath the word positive because it means something's being added. The type of reinforcement that occurs when you avoid something is called negative reinforcement. And that you can see there's a negative sign there because it means something's been removed. In the example where the parent says, "Where is your nose?" and the child points to his or her nose, and the parent says, "That's your nose. Good job." The child receives positive reinforcement because he or she receives a parent's attention as well as praise. You can see in the example A, B, and C directly before each of the components. A is antecedent, B is behavior, and C is consequence. Together, this forms a pattern of behavior. If a child's behavior is followed by a pleasant or desired consequence, it's likely to happen again. In the negative reinforcement example we see, the parent says, "It's time for bed." The child complains and the parent says, "Okay, 5 more minutes of playtime." In the future, the child is likely to complain again because it was successful in avoiding an undesired or an aversive activity, such as going to bed. So if you think about this from the challenging behavior perspective, in the example that I talked about where the child comes down and they're whining and complaining about going to bed and you give in, then other times you don't give in, but that's how patterns of behavior develop. It doesn't matter if on Monday and Tuesday you didn't give in, if on Wednesday and Thursday you did, because they know that reinforcement is possibly available. It's the same thing like when you go to a slot machine, right? You're not going to win every single time, but you know that there's a possibility that you might win, so you keep going back. So a child will continue to engage in a behavior if it has been reinforced at all, or if it's been reinforced intermittently. And even though you might feel as if, well, I'm addressing this behavior rationally or reasonably, sometimes it doesn't matter what you say. It just matters that you're responding to the behavior at all. You're serving to create, to perpetuate the pattern of behavior. Does that make sense? So now that you kind of understand how patterns of behavior can develop, now let's talk about what do you do to break it up. So the first thing you have to do is really look at when it's occurring, how it's occurring, and who it's occurring with. One of the things that I say to do is collect a little bit of data. For me, it always helps to quantify it, especially if I'm looking at my own child, right? Because when we look at our own child, it's hard to stay objective and it's hard to really understand things from an outsider's perspective. So there's different types of data that you can collect. The first type of data that you could collect is frequency data. Frequency data is typically collected by tallying or scoring every single occurrence of the behavior. This type of data is helpful for behaviors that have a clear beginning and end and don't occur too quickly. An example of frequency data would be Johnny darted 3 times from the table at the restaurant. If a behavior occurs very quickly and it would be difficult to tally every occurrence, interval data is also a good option. That's when you take a certain amount of time and you divide it into equal intervals and score if a behavior occurs in an interval. You only score it one time within that period of time. An example would be Johnny exhibited non-compliant behavior for 3 out of 4 10-minute intervals within a 40-minute period while grocery shopping. The next type of data that you could collect is duration data. Duration data is collected by starting a stopwatch at the beginning of the behavior and stopping it at the end of the behavior. An example of duration data would be Johnny had a temper tantrum that lasted for 17 minutes at bedtime. The last type of frequently used data collection is latency data. Latency data is when you time the onset of a behavior in respect to an event. An example of this would be Johnny was under the table for the first 5 minutes of dinner. The next type of data that you would want to gather is ABC or function-based data. This type of data allows you to determine what purpose the behavior is serving the individual and ultimately what the function is, which I'll discuss in the next slide. So, as I showed you in the positive and negative reinforcement example, A is what comes before a behavior actually happens. And when you're recording ABC data, it's important to note exactly or specifically what happened immediately before the behavior. B is for behavior itself. Make sure you're descriptive and you're precise when you're describing your behavior. And C is the consequence, so what happens immediately thereafter. In this example, we see Johnny's mom says, "It's time for bed." The behavior is Johnny running away and saying no. Mom says, "Johnny, come on now, it's bedtime," but Johnny doesn't comply. In this particular example, we can see that Johnny is able to 1, avoid bedtime, but 2, also receive parent attention. This can make it a little bit hard to distinguish the function that it's serving for the individual. However, when you collect multiple scenarios or multiple occurrences of a behavior, you should start to see a pattern develop. If the majority of the behavioral episodes result in your child receiving attention and/or a preferred item or activity, it's likely that the function of the behavior is maintained by positive reinforcement. If the majority of the behaviors result in your child escaping or avoiding unpleasant or non-preferred activities, it's likely that the function of the behavior is maintained by negative reinforcement. If it's unclear what reinforcement is serving your child, and it appears that it occurs across multiple contexts and across multiple individuals, it might have a sensory function. And sensory functions are automatically reinforced by internal events. Gathering all that data might seem like a lot of work, but I promise you it's worth it, because if you develop an intervention plan or you develop some strategies that you want to utilize to address these behaviors, those data will allow you to compare how effective your intervention is by seeing if there's a reduction or a decrease in the overall rates of behavior. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can analyze these data in order to develop effective strategies and great responses to when behavior occurs. Let me show you how. The first thing you're going to do in analyzing your data is identify antecedent strategies or ways to prevent the occurrence of a behavior. So think about ways that could block or prevent a behavior from occurring in the first place. The next thing you're going to do is think about the behavior itself. What would you like to see your child do instead? Those will become the replacement skills that you will teach. Next, look at the consequence or the ways in which you are currently responding to the behavior. How can you change your response or the responses of others to ensure that the behavior isn't reinforced? Moreover, you also have to think about how can I ensure that I provide reinforcement so that it serves the same function for the replacement skills. It's important that all of these components are equally addressed to have a comprehensive, effective plan that will increase desired behaviors and decrease maladaptive or problem behaviors. So I hope that gives you a better understanding of not only why behavior occurs, but how assessment can be utilized to develop both interventions and strategies that are meaningful and effective. The goal of all this isn't necessarily just to make the behavior go away, although we'd really like that, right? It would make life a little bit easier. The goal is to have the child develop the skills necessary to overcome the behavior and to have meaningful improvement in their lives, and also the lives of your family. In all, I hope that this was helpful and that you're able to utilize this information in a beneficial way. Thank you so much.